Hey, it's Terry, and this is the Something Spooky review of The Nun. The Nun was released in September of 2018 by Warner Brothers, and it was the fifth installment in the Conjuring universe. It was directed by Corin Hardy, who had directed The Hollow before that, which I've never seen, and apparently people really like, so I want to check that out next. I'm going to definitely make a point of that. So The Nun was made on a budget of $22 million and grossed $365 million at the box office, which is just an astronomical amount for a horror movie. I mean, that's a great, you know, box office return for any movie, even like movies with much bigger budgets than even $22 million. And so for a horror movie to make that kind of money is just almost unprecedented. It's crazy how much they saw back on that. It's the highest grossing film in the Conjuring universe. And it had a few interesting things leading up to its release. There was a YouTube violation that they kind of got in trouble for because they had an ad where it jumped out and scared the viewer, which was like against the terms of YouTube. And they also reportedly, from Wikipedia, had a $90 million marketing budget, which kind of goes back on maybe why they saw such a return of that other number, the box office number. But $90 million is a lot for any movie, especially a horror movie. And I do feel like I remember seeing a lot of promotion and trailers and images and stuff leading up to its release. So they really were pushing it out there, and it paid off. I mean, $365 million, the highest grossing in the franchise. Wow. It does have a 26% on Rotten Tomatoes, so not very popular critically. Apparently did not make much of an impact on people wanting to go see it. I think that's a little low for me, but that usually is the case with Rotten Tomato and horror movies, and it's not too far off. It's a good movie, but it is not a great movie. So it starts with explicit ties to the Conjuring universe, which is interesting because we hadn't really seen that much in the other spin-offs in the series that up to that point, like the Annabelle movies. So I mean, it starts with Ed and Lorraine Warren, and it's like direct scenes from the other Conjuring movies, so it makes that real clear tie out the gate. And it helps. It's effective. It kind of sets the stage for what is a more abstract kind of story going back to this abbey in Romania that we're going to get into. But so it has this opening that ties directly to The Conjuring, and then quickly it moves into its own setting, which is this abbey in Romania, and it's haunted basically. And some stuff happens in the pre-credit scene that is kind of part of the problem with this movie, which is that it's just not very scary. The scares just don't really land. They're not very scary. You don't ever really feel investment in the characters and what's happening on the screen, despite some cool visual flares and stuff along the way that we're going to get into. But right away in that pre-credit scene, it just doesn't really land and doesn't make the kind of punch it needs to get the viewer invested. And then worse, when it comes back, it really kind of grinds to a halt. And we spend some time getting to know the characters and meeting them and learning their motivations, and they're starting to travel to this haunted abbey that we had seen in the pre-credit scene, and it just drags. It is really slow. For me, I just immediately didn't really care about the characters, wasn't invested in what was going on with them, even though this is when we should be building that connection. We're leading into their adventure together, but immediately I just don't really care about any of them. But then, so that when they do get to the haunted abbey, that's the best parts of the movie, like the haunted abbey itself, and then the gothic Romania countryside around it. There are some really cool scenes and scares, and that's the movie at its best. That's what I like best about it. The M.V. Moorhead of Phoenix Magazine, in his review, actually compared this aspect of the movie to Mario Bava movies of the 60s, the Italian horror director. And I can see that. It's a good comparison. It's something I was trying to find an articulation for, so that's a good way to say it, in that it feels very traditional almost in the way it presents its sets and its spooky cemeteries and these long scenes of characters just slinking around through the fog around these weird creepy sets, and like that's what I like best about the movie. That's the best part of the movie, and there's a good chunk of that right here. But then it kind of gets back into just meandering around with the characters, and it just never really finds any footing for them. You never really do come to care about them all through this while the story keeps developing. There is a scene about halfway through or so that has a duke, and it's like the origin of the story. Basically, it's this kind of flashback scene, and it kind of establishes where this evil that we've been dealing with in all of these movies kind of first came from, its origin source. And I was thinking, like, I want that movie. I bet that would be great because it's even more like middle-aged feel, and like the creepy Duke making sacrifices and seeing how all of this started. They should do that. I know that they have plenty of Conjuring movies coming already, so they probably don't need ideas for more, but I thought the Duke was a cool concept in the movie. Overall, the movie is it's a weird movie because it's very ambitious in a sense that it tries to do all of these different things, but it doesn't really do any of them, and it doesn't really land anywhere. It has these action adventure elements almost, where the characters like never really feel like they're in any trouble really. They're like this heroic trio of characters on this quest that they're being like propelled through, and they're kind of moving through these set pieces like in an action movie. There's even like one-liners and some goofy things like that, and the blood of Christ artifact and the way that comes in and plays out is very like adventure movie kind of feeling. It's very odd because then at the same time it's still a horror movie. Like, I didn't find it scary, but it would be scary for some viewers, and there's definitely graphic imagery, so it's still very much a horror movie. It doesn't go all the way into towing that action-adventure horror line like some movies have been able to do. It still feels like it's trying to be a scary horror movie, but then it's at odds with the way it's kind of telling this narrative and the way it's unfolding with the characters. So it just doesn't really stick either landing. It doesn't really seem to know what it wants to be. The ending has some good visual scares right in a row, outside of like the scenes of them slinking around the sets earlier. Like, it's my favorite part of the movie is like right in a row they do a bunch of cool, scary gags in that kind of Conjuring style right at the end, like the nuns with the black masks. Like, that's a very cool, it's a simple thing, but the way they do it and the way that exchange happens is effective, and it's spooky and it's creative. As is, almost always the case in these movies, especially the Conjuring movies in particular, the weakest points are when we get these straight shots of the monster, the nun, and it's always very computer graphics heavy, and it just kind of takes the tension away from the rest of the scares, because now you've kind of been shown the full light, and it didn't even look that good. Like, the problem with computer graphics is once you see that, that they can just do anything they want now. It kind of removes like the game of cat and mouse that they're playing, because now there's just anything can happen, and it's all going to basically look the same, and it's not going to look very good. It's going to look computer generated. So those scenes which are supposed to be so impactful of like the nun screaming at the camera, sometimes there is a mix of actor and practical effects, and sometimes it works, but there are just some ones in particular that really seem to take the wind out of the scares a bit and kind of work against what some of the other scares in the movie are able to do with their more simple setting. It's this weird dichotomy, but it's something we're starting to see be pretty common in this franchise in particular. The biggest sin for the movie is that you just don't really care about the characters. You just don't particularly feel invested in them, don't really like them, and because of that, it's hard to feel, too engaged with what's happening on the screen. Like, no matter what they pull off or how creepy something could be, if you don't really care about what's happening, then it just kind of becomes this like shallow jump out and scare you thing, and you don't have any real investment in being afraid. So that's probably the biggest problem with the movie, and it's like a two-pronged thing of the characters not really landing, and then the scares not really landing. They kind of go hand in hand. Overall, it's not a bad movie. It's not a great movie. It kind of just lands where it lands, which is on confused ground. Overall, I'm going to give it a C. It's okay. It's worth watching, as a follow-up in the Conjuring universe, but it definitely kind of feels like a disappointment for what they could have done tying into that deep Conjuring folklore, which is so interesting and kind of unprecedented in horror movies, and then to reach such a large audience and have so much excitement for it, it does just feel a bit like a lost opportunity. So that's The Nun. It's going to get a C. Hope you enjoyed this review. If you did, please give it a like and share it with your friends, and remember to follow Something Spooky. Thanks.